Okay, hello everyone. Thank you, Nene, for introduction. This is Hojoon, and at the University of Houston, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to present our paper in the ARF virtual event session. Let me begin my presentation with the purpose of the study. So basically, this study examines how consumers' diverse perspectives on feminism differentially predict evaluative responses to advertisement featuring a sexual image of women. So on the next slide. So in detail, this study started from the following the context and the problem definition. So according to the previous studies, at least until the 1990s, feminism and sexual objectification of women in advertising are in opposition. So such kind of phenomenon is primarily influenced by the second wave of feminism, which was quite popular in the middle of the 20th century. So according to this second wave of feminism, this feminism trend attacked and assailed the sexual objectification of women in mass media as sexist pop culture. So this feminism trend, the wave, treated women's sexual desire and pleasure as unfeminist. But in the next slide. So, but more recent studies indicate that the contemporary feminists exhibit more favorable responses, and this change is mainly influenced by the third wave of feminism that began in 1990s. So according to this third wave of feminism, this feminism more embraces women's sexuality as natural femininity and a tool to empower their sexual liberation. So this contemporary the feminist consumers are more likely to evaluate sexual images of women in advertising positively. But on the next slide. There are two issues. There are two issues for this research findings so far. First issue is about those research findings are only US-centric. What it means, although feminism has been driven by Western countries, but it has been the feminism has been a worldwide social movement for the last century. So what it means, the feminism, the movement, and the feminism, the activists share the same ideology and thinking across the culture and across the countries. So based on that fact, one new research question is arised. The findings consistent in countries with different cultural backgrounds. And the second issue is about the feminism measurement. So previous studies examined the consumers' feminism attitudes just as one dimension and one measurement. But as we already know, what everyone talks about feminism is quite different each other. That's why we need to examine the impact of diverse feminist perspectives. So on the next slide. So first of all, in the sense of the sampling issue, we thought South Korea consumers could be the ideal sample for this study of a non-US cultural background, because like other East Asian countries, Korean consumers had been on the collectivistic value system of Confucianism, but they also adopted the Western legal and education system for their economic development, including feminism. Especially the spread of third wave feminism movement is quite faster than other countries. Okay, so on the next slide. And second, for the issue of feminism measurement, we employed the Henley et al.'s Feminist Perspectives Scale, because this scale introduces and categorizes different types of feminist perspectives, such as conservative perspective, liberal feminist perspective, and a radical feminist perspective. People having conservative perspective is against feminism, so they support traditional gender arrangement, and they support women's subordinate role, so less negative toward the sexual image of women. On the other hand, people having liberal feminist perspective They believe men and women are equal, and they are positive about sexual expression and liberation as a means of feminism. But for the people having a radical feminist perspective, they believe women are fundamentally oppressed by men, and they criticize any type of sexual appeal in mass media and advertising because they think them as the sexual exploitation. So on the next slide, based on the literature review, so we positive the following hypothesis. First, consumers' liberal feminist perspective will influence positively their ethical judgment, attitude toward ad, and brand interest toward advertisement featuring women's sexual imagery. And second hypothesis, consumers' radical feminist perspective will influence negatively their advertising responses. And in the next slide, the predictive effect of liberal feminist perspective on those ad responses will be stronger than the effect of the radical feminist perspective. That hypothesis was based on the theoretical reasoning that liberal feminism is more rooted in the contemporary third wave feminism, while the radical perspective is more rooted in the second wave of feminism. So we expected the influence of third wave feminism will be stronger than the influence of the second wave feminism. And one more research question was, how will consumers' diverse feminist perspectives interact with their gender when they evaluate advertisement featuring sexual images of women? So based on this hypothesis, next slide. So we conducted a between subject design the experiment, male versus female consumers, with post-measurement of that FPA scale. And we collected 450 South Korean adults aged from 19 to 66, participated in an online survey, and their average age was 42 years old. And our experiment consisted of three sections. In the first section, the respondents' demographic information was measured. And in the second section, we exposed the advertising stimuli and respondents evaluated. And in the last section, respondents completed their the feminism scale. So in the next slide, so they were advertising stimuli we used. So based on these two nude condition over Tom Ford brand original advertising, the Photoshop edited with Photoshop with the to the extended demure and partially created conditions. But for those 6 advertising stimuli, once we conduct the manipulation check, the one advertisement in demure condition didn't make the enough level of sexual explicitness. But the other advertising stimuli were not different in terms of the advertising responses. So we approved this advertisement into one group. In the next slide. So it's still results. As you can see that the hierarchical regression, the analysis result. When we see the main effect, conservative perspective and liberal feminist perspective positively predicted all the dependent variables. But radical feminist perspective negatively predicted ethical judgment. And when we see that interaction effect, regarding the interaction effects between gender and conservative perspective, as female respondents have more conservative perspective, their ethical judgment and attitudes were positive. But regarding the interaction effect between gender by liberal feminism, gender by radical feminism perspectives, the influence of radical feminism was more negative among female than male respondents. So on the next slide. Okay, let me finish it quickly. So we provide, our research provide following theoretical and practical implications. First, theoretically, individuals associated with liberal feminism show the positive perceptions of women in sexual ads, while the negative influence of radical feminism was somewhat limited. So the positive influence of feminism is significant, even under different cultural backgrounds, as far as the third wave feminism is widespread. And the influence of conservative perspective and liberal feminist perspective was stronger than that of radical feminist perspective. So it means consumers have 2 different reasons why they like this sexual appeal. And in the next slide. So why this study matters for targeting? Practically, when using sexual appeal in advertising, targeting a pro-feminist group on the third wave or liberal feminist perspective may overcome that different cultural background. And such application will be valid only when the women is depicted as independent and not submissive mother. So in that sense, that FPS scale will be quite useful to target consumer groups having different feminist perspectives. And on the next slide. So finally, we recommend the practitioners. So practitioners will be better to consider which feminist perspective best fit with their brand positioning and the target audience. And regarding the recent trend of the advertising, so the practitioners could embrace more explicit and sexual appeals that depict women as sexually independent and target contemporary feminists with sexually liberal perspectives. Okay, next slide. Okay, thank you, and we look forward to see your the question at the the Q&A session.